this video, we're going to cover what is procurement contract management. Contract management is such an underappreciated, underutilized set of tools within the procurement lifecycle. In fact, it's normally relegated to a really linear end phase, especially by SIPs, which really frustrates and causes a lot of disappointment, because what contract management is effectively is from that very first intent, that request that someone has within your business that they want to go buy something, the contract strategy, the contract lifecycle starts there. Because all of those ideas, all of those thoughts, all of those problems that you want to solve, you're going to have to turn that into this contractual document. It's going to be that vehicle that enables all of that intent matched with whatever you have with regards to your supplier, whatever you've agreed with them. You've got to fuse that together, put it into a document, use that document to then govern the relationship, the performance of, if it's a service, the delivery of the goods, both. That's very common that there's some kind of delivery of an item, of intellectual property, of services, of software, plus a lot of services that go with that. The contract is important, right? So the way we should talk about this is pre-signature contract management and post-signature contract management. We shouldn't relegate either of those. And when we talk about pre-signature contract management, we're talking about all of the activities up until the point of signature. So, for example, determining the correct contractual vehicle, the correct contract type that we need to use with our supplier. And this might be a very easy decision. See, our supplier might just give us a contract, to be honest. And this happens time and time again. And then your decision making changes somewhat, right? It's like, do we use this contract? Do we send one of ours? And you have like this to and from it, a bit of a boxing fight. It's a little bit awkward at times. But that's a really key moment in time. It's like, what contract is going to enable us to manage this supplier, to manage this relationship, and to get what we need out of it. And then from there, like we need to have a process for all of this, right? Because we can't just be involved, hopefully as early as possible, and figure out like, oh, we need some kind of contract, but how do we start the process of like getting this contract in place, reviewing it, negotiating it, doing any red lines, having those negotiation conversations, those calls, those in-person meetings. So pre-signature contract management is fundamentally focused on the request for contract through to contract signature. And what that process typically looks like is someone in your business raises a request that a contract needs to be put in place with a certain supplier. This might be someone in procurement. It may be someone else in the business. It could just be for a non-disclosure agreement at the start. It may be for a master services agreement, so on and so forth. And then your next step of the process is typically like the triage, right? This is where we look into the request. We see what it's about, we see who needs to work on it, we see the complexities, the issues, the challenges of getting this contract in place, and then we can assign the right person or people from legal, from procurement, from the contract management team. It really depends on how you're set up, right? To start working on that contract. And what we mean by working on it is reviewing it. So someone's going to read that contract, they're going to pull out the bits they don't like, they're going to redline it, so scratch a line through the contract, use Word, delete it with track changes on, and then send it back to the supplier. And just a quick caveat here, because something I've not mentioned so far is that technology can massively help you here. There are so many contract lifecycle management and contract tech, legal tech providers out there. There's a lot of procurement tech that also incorporate this. There's so much tech that can help you, govern this entire process through digital workflows and digital processes. There's some that allow you to automate using artificial intelligence, the redlining, the review of contracts, and everything else linked to them. It's a super exciting space. It's super saturated. It's so hard to figure out who you should use. Gartner do a fairly good magic quadrant for this area, but that's the gist of it, right? It's like request, triage, review, negotiate, which is, say I'm the reviewer, I'm going to go and speak with my supplier and say, actually, we don't like these 5 areas here. We want them changed to these. We don't like them because of X, Y, and Z. You should always do that. It's really good practice to do so. Can we go from there? And there's normally a lot of to and fro here. And then we're going to move it into an internal review and approval process within our organization based on the risks and whatever else we need to consider regarding that contract. And then we're going to move on and have it signed. And that will be usually by someone in the C-suite or someone senior who has those signatory powers. And in short, that's the pre-signature side. That's complete. And that will work alongside your sourcing, your negotiation phases of that procurement lifecycle. So you can see there that there's so much to contract lifecycle management. It should never just be neglected and relegated to a single phase that's at the back end of the procurement lifecycle. Now we're going to talk about post-signature contract management, because that's super important as well. So once the contract's been signed, what happens next? Well, we need to make sure that the contract and that supplier delivers on the things that they said they would. So we have obligation management. Obligations within contracts are promises that either party will do a certain thing by a set period of time or in a certain way, and we need to make sure that both parties, myself and my supplier, are going to do that. So we have an obligation to our suppliers to do certain things, and our supplier has an obligation to do certain things for us. We need to pull all of those obligations out of the contract, track every single one of them, and make sure that's happening. Once again, tech, super useful here to extract this information, to have a dedicated area for obligation management. A lot of people default to trying to do this in spreadsheets, end up not doing it, super tedious to try and extract all of this information, and it just kind of doesn't work. But this is a really critical moment. And then just sort of as a sub-layer, a sub-level, let's say, of this, we then have SLAs and KPIs. So we've got service level agreements, key performance indicators. They're normally used in contracts as well. Usually when there's some kind of service or software that is being delivered, we need to make sure that the service and the software, let's just say service here, is being delivered to a set standard. And that set standard may be uptime, it may be response time, and a whole raft of other things. These are, strictly speaking, obligations, but they're like dedicated, like really niche. That's how I think about them. They're niche, they're carved out. There's a lot more importance around these, especially with service level agreements, SLAs, because if the supplier doesn't deliver on them, you'll usually have something called service credits, which allows you to reduce the amount of money you pay your supplier. So there is an incentive for your supplier there as well. And then beyond that, we have things like risk management, relationship management. We have warehousing, logistics. There's so much that is embodied by that contract. So the type of delivery, who is responsible for paying for the delivery, when that delivery is going to happen, who to contact if there is an issue, if there's a breach, if there's a relationship problem, what happens if we need to go to litigation. There's so many pieces of the puzzle there that will be in this contract that people need to know about. And then we have things like contract amendments. So if we need to change the contract, or the supplier suggests that we change the contract for whatever reason, we need to enter into another process. And that is to make a formal change to the contract, which then effectively needs to go through that pre-signature process that I mentioned earlier on. There'll be a request for a contract amendment. And then from there, we'll go through, we'll review it, negotiate it, redline it, redraft it, until it gets to our internal process when effectively we're saying, we've got this to a good state. People who are more senior, maybe the general counsel, head of legal, head of procurement, someone like that will just authorize it and we can get it signed off. And then probably the last, but I would say almost most important piece is termination, exit, renewal. I kind of bundle all three of those together. What happens when we no longer need the contract, or what happens when the contract is coming to an end and we need it for longer? Those two things need to be captured in a process. And this process is crucial. So many companies get this part wrong. They forget about it, right? And it's a really dangerous area to forget about, because if you forget about this, you're going to be losing value, losing money so often. I speak to people daily, weekly, who tell me that they've lost thousands, sometimes millions, because they've had contracts renewed that they didn't want to be renewed, or they've missed out on continuity or supply because the contract ended with the supplier they didn't realize, and then they've gone to the supplier, asked for stuff, and the supplier's like, hey, we no longer have a contract, we emailed you like 20 times and you ghosted us. Which is another problem, right? When you're dealing with all of this via email instead of dedicated like procurement tech or contract tech, like I mentioned. So having that dedicated process for the end of life of a contract is vital. And then I would say beyond that, if you are ending that relationship, what happens? Because there's probably been an exchange of information, exchange of resources. So I've actually had suppliers that I've provided equipment to, testing equipment to, prototypes to, so that they can build things, use it, and therefore deliver a better end product to me. I need all of that stuff back. I may have shared intellectual property, documentation that I need back, and This, the offboarding phase, is the most neglected process. No one does this well. I've worked in, I don't know, maybe 8 or so organizations. I've actually seen one organization wipe millions off of their asset register because they've just left stuff with the supplier, can't be bothered to get it. There's actually a government body, which is even more frustrating to see. So making sure you get your property back at the end of the relationship, whether it's intellectual property or physical property, massive. So building all of these in to your post-signature contract management processes is so critical, right? So in a nutshell, this is what contract management is within procurement. It's the pre-signature pieces which aligns with your sourcing strategy and all of that, and then your post-signature processes that aligns with your enabling of that relationship, making sure that you get whatever you need from your suppliers. If you have any questions on contract management, please let me know in the comments below. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. And before you go check out this video here. It's about like all of the key clauses that I think are super important in procurement contracts. I think you'll find it super valuable. Goodbye.